Good morning, you're listening to the brief wake up, your mindful start to the day. I'm Handel, your daily coffee companion, helping you wake up informed, thoughtful, and maybe just a little amused before the day gets old. If you're commuting, corralling kids, or just standing in line for caffeine, you're in the right place. Let's get you caught up. Today in health, let's talk about amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, better known as ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS is a progressive neurodegenerative condition that attacks motor neurons, the nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord responsible for controlling voluntary muscle movement. When these neurons die, the brain can no longer communicate effectively with muscles. Over time, the muscles weaken, shrink, and eventually stop functioning. What makes ALS particularly cruel is the contrast between body and mind. In many patients, cognition and awareness remain largely intact, while the ability to move, speak, swallow, and eventually breathe gradually disappears. The early signs can be subtle. People may notice muscle twitching, weakness in a hand, difficulty with fine movements like buttoning a shirt, or slurred speech. Others develop trouble swallowing, or unexplained weakness in a leg that causes frequent tripping. As the disease progresses, that weakness spreads. Walking becomes difficult, speech becomes harder to understand, swallowing becomes unsafe. Ultimately, the muscles that control breathing are affected, which is the most common cause of death in ALS. Most cases occur sporadically, meaning there is no clear family history. About 5 to 10% are inherited and linked to genetic mutations. The disease typically appears between the ages of 55 and 75, though it can occur earlier. There is currently no cure, but treatments can modestly slow the disease. One medication, riluzole, works by reducing glutamate-related nerve damage and has been shown to extend survival slightly. Another therapy, edaravone, may slow functional decline in some patients. Supportive care, respiratory assistance, feeding support, physical therapy, and multidisciplinary ALS clinics plays a major role in maintaining quality of life. The average survival after diagnosis is about 3 to 5 years, although some individuals live much longer. One famous example was physicist Stephen Hawking, who lived with ALS for more than 5 decades. Research is accelerating, especially in areas like gene therapy, stem cell strategies, and targeted treatments for specific mutations. The hope is that what we currently understand as one disease may actually be several related disorders, meaning more precise therapies could emerge. ALS reminds us of something profound in medicine. Sometimes the most devastating diseases are not the ones that take cognition or consciousness, but the ones that trap a fully aware mind inside a failing body. And that's today's health segment. The news is next. Turning to international news, the conflict in the Middle East is widening beyond Israel and Gaza into a broader regional confrontation involving Iran and several neighboring countries. The crisis intensified after major US and Israeli strikes on Iranian targets, which Iran has responded to with missile and drone attacks across the Gulf region. Iranian forces have struck or attempted strikes on sites in countries including Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman, many of them locations hosting US military bases or key energy infrastructure. In some cases, missiles have been intercepted, but there have also been casualties and damage to shipping and port facilities. Another major development involves the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically important shipping routes in the world. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has warned that the strait is effectively closed and that any vessel attempting to pass could be targeted. The waterway carries roughly 1/5 of the world's seaborne oil, so even the threat of disruption has already pushed shipping companies to divert routes and sent energy markets sharply higher. Meanwhile, Israel is facing an increasingly active northern front. The Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah, based in Lebanon, has launched missiles and drones into northern Israel in retaliation for the strikes on Iran and the killing of senior Iranian leadership. Israel has responded with large airstrikes across Lebanon and has ordered evacuations in parts of the south while targeting hundreds of Hezbollah positions. The strategic concern now is escalation. What began as a conflict centered on Gaza has evolved into a multi-front confrontation involving Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, and U.S. forces in the Gulf, with additional regional actors watching closely. Diplomatic channels remain limited, and communication between the major powers involved is largely indirect through intermediaries. For now, the pattern is continued military exchanges, combined with fragile efforts to prevent the conflict from expanding into a full-scale regional war. That's the latest on the Middle East. The Big Sip is next. Continuing our IQ series. The last episode, we established what IQ is designed to measure: cognitive processing efficiency under standardized conditions. Today, the natural follow-up question is simple. What do the numbers actually mean? When someone says an IQ of 100, 115, or 145, what are we really describing? IQ scores are built around a normal distribution, sometimes called the bell curve. In that distribution, the population average is set at 100. The spread of scores is measured using standard deviations, and on most modern IQ tests, one standard deviation equals 15 points. That statistical structure allows psychologists to translate raw scores into percentiles, which tell us what proportion of the population someone scored higher than. An IQ of 100 sits exactly at the center. That means about half of the population scores above it and half below it. Move up one standard deviation to 115, and you're already at roughly the 84th percentile. In practical terms, that means scoring higher than about 84% of people. At 130, which is 2 standard deviations above the mean, you're around the 98th percentile. Only about 2% of the population scores that high. By the time you reach 145, you're roughly 3 standard deviations above average, around the 99.9% percentile. At that point, you're talking about roughly 1 person out of 1,000. This is why small changes in IQ scores can represent large shifts in rarity. A jump from 100 to 115 may look modest numerically, but statistically, it moves someone from the middle of the population into the top 6th. Moving from 115 to 130 pushes someone into the top 2%. Each step up the curve represents fewer and fewer people. Now here's an important nuance. High cognitive professions tend to cluster above the population average, but not uniformly in the extreme ranges. Take surgeons, for example. Surgery requires strong working memory, rapid pattern recognition, spatial reasoning, and decision-making under pressure. As a result, surgeons tend to fall above the population mean, often somewhere in the 115 to 130 range. But that doesn't mean every surgeon is sitting in the top 0.1% of cognitive ability. And more importantly, success in complex professions depends on many other factors: discipline, judgment, emotional regulation, teamwork, and thousands of hours of deliberate practice. IQ helps explain part of cognitive performance. It does not explain the entirety of human capability. Understanding the bell curve helps remove the mythology around IQ numbers. The scores simply describe where someone falls relative to the broader population on a specific set of structured cognitive tasks. Nothing more, nothing less. In the next episode, we'll tackle one of the most debated questions in psychology. How much of intelligence is inherited or influenced by the environment? The lighter roast is next. Here's a small mystery of everyday life. Why do we forget someone's name about 3 seconds after hearing it? You meet someone. They say, "Hi, I'm Sarah." You shake their hand, smile, and by the time the conversation begins, the name is already gone. This happens to almost everyone, and there's actually a cognitive reason for it. When someone introduces themselves, your brain isn't just listening to the name. It's doing several things at once. It's evaluating the situation. Do I know this person? Do they seem friendly? What should I say next? How should I respond? Your brain is managing the social interaction in real time. Because your attention is divided, the name often never fully registers. Psychologists call this a failure of encoding, not a failure of memory. In other words, the brain can't remember information that it never properly stored in the first place. Names are also uniquely difficult for the brain because they're usually arbitrary labels. If someone tells you they're a cardiologist from Chicago who loves sailing, your brain has multiple hooks to attach that information to. But a name by itself, Sarah or David, often has no context, no meaning, no anchor. The good news is that there are simple ways to fix this. The first strategy is repetition. When someone introduces themselves, repeat the name right away. If they say, "Hi, I'm Sarah," respond with, "Nice to meet you, Sarah." That quick repetition forces your brain to process the word a second time, which significantly improves the chances that it will stick. The second strategy is association. Try to attach the name to something about the person, their job, where you met them, or a visual detail. Maybe Sarah is the architect you met at a conference. Now the brain links the name to a story or image instead of a random label. And the third strategy is attention. When you hear the name, make a conscious effort to focus on it for just a moment. Even a brief pause of deliberate attention dramatically improves encoding. And if you do forget, which happens to everyone, the best move is simply to ask again early. 10 seconds later is completely normal. 10 minutes later becomes awkward. An hour later becomes a small social crisis. So if you've ever felt bad about forgetting someone's name immediately after meeting them, don't worry. It doesn't mean you're inattentive, and it certainly doesn't mean you have a bad memory. It usually just means your brain was busy doing what it evolved to do, navigating the social moment. That's today's lighter roast. Our commemoration is next. March 4th holds a unique place in American political history. For nearly a century and a half, March 4th was the official U.S. presidential inauguration day. Beginning in 1793 and continuing until 1933, new presidents took the oath of office on this date because it allowed time for election results to travel and for the new government to assemble in the early republic. One of the most consequential inaugurations occurred on March 4th, 1933, when Franklin D. Roosevelt took office during the depths of the Great Depression. Banks were collapsing, unemployment was soaring, and confidence in the economy had nearly evaporated. In his inaugural address, Roosevelt delivered one of the most famous lines in American political history. "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." That moment marked the beginning of the sweeping economic reforms known as the New Deal. March 4th also connects back to the very beginning of the constitutional government itself. On March 4th, 1789, the first Congress of the United States convened under the newly ratified Constitution, formally launching the government structure that still operates today. The day also carries a cultural note. The legendary Italian composer Antonio Vivaldi was born on March 4th, 1678. His masterpiece, The Four Seasons, remains one of the most recognizable and performed works in classical music, a piece that translates nature itself into sound. And in a very different corner of culture, actress Catherine O'Hara, known for unforgettable roles from Schitt's Creek to the anxious but lovable mom in Home Alone, also celebrates a birthday today, a reminder that cultural icons come in many forms. So March 4th carries a thread of beginnings, the start of constitutional government, leadership during national crisis, and creative voices that continue to echo across centuries. That's today's commemoration. Today we looked at ALS, a devastating disease that gradually disconnects the brain from the body, while research continues to push toward better treatments and understanding. We also examined the fragile state of the Middle East as fighting expands beyond Gaza toward Israel's northern border, raising concerns about a broader regional conflict. And along the way, we explored what IQ scores actually mean, why names slip from memory so quickly, and a few historical notes that make March 4th a day of beginnings. This is Dr. Robinson for the Brief Wake Up. Stay calm, kind, and curious. Catch you next time.